All right, let's talk about proration, everybody's favorite subject. When you prorate expenses, and basically what the term proration means is the buyer and seller have to split cost on the property at closing, taxes, HOA, interest on the mortgage, all that stuff. Okay. And so the way this happens is when you prorate expenses, if they're split between the buyer and the seller, the state of Florida, the way they prorate expenses when it comes to real estate, specifically Florida, because every state has their own standard set of operations, SOPs, standard of operations, on how they do their prorations. And so, Florida, what you want to know when you do an actual proration problem, know that it's dividing what needs to be prorated. It's divided between the buyer and seller based on the act of sale. Okay, the day of closing always belongs to the buyer unless the problem says otherwise. Okay. So if the problem says that the day of closing belongs to the seller and you knowing that it should belong to the buyer under normal conditions, if it doesn't say anything different, but the problem says it belongs to the seller, then that's going to tell you one thing. The seller is going to be charged one extra day, right? Because under normal conditions, the day of closing belongs to the buyer. But they tell you in the problem that it belongs to the seller, so that you know now that you're going to have to put one extra day for the seller. Okay. The proration method, the 360 versus 365. 360 is another name they call this is a banker's year. Okay. This is called a banker or a statutory year. Okay. And so the 360 method would be 30 days each month and 360 days for the year. Only use the 360 method if it's mentioned. Okay. 365 is what it defaults to. You're always going to use the 365 method unless the problem says otherwise. Okay. That's the days of the month to include February is 28. But on your state exam, unless they mention that it's a leap year, you're going to use 28 days. Okay. And it's going to be the days of the month. So January is 31, 28 for February, March 31, April 30, May 31, June 30, and so on. Okay. So days of the month you're going to use and 365. Always default to that. And the buyer gets the day of closing unless the problem says otherwise, which means if it does say otherwise, the seller's going to get one extra day. Okay. All right. The day of closing, and you got to finish it. What do you think? All right. Yeah, it's a tricky one. You're right. So this is, this looks like a simple question, but it's a little bit, you can fumble here. So here's what you got to realize. Okay. Let's go back and review. For Florida, when you're working this problem out, or if you get a theory question like we just got, the day of closing belongs to the buyer unless the problem says otherwise. So is the buyer always going to get the day of closing? And the answer is no. Okay. And we know if it belongs to the seller, there's one extra day charge for the seller. Okay. Normally, it belongs to the buyer, but the problem could say otherwise. So that means it's not always going to be the buyer. Okay. So if you come back and read this, the day of closing is always charged to the buyer. We know that not to be true. Okay. If belonging to the seller, it means the seller's charged one less day. We know that not to be true. Is always charged to the seller. We know that not to be true. If belonging to the seller, it means they'll get one extra day. We know that to be true. So you got to, again, this goes back to how you're going to read the question, right? And what you understand about it. You know that proration can be buyer or seller has the day of closing. So it can't belong to either one always. Okay. If it does belong to the seller, that means the seller is going to get one extra day. Okay. And always take this into account when you're working the problem. Okay. When you're working the math problem. All right.
For more practice questions, videos, and insight into the state exam, we encourage you to join our free webinar, How to Pass the Real Estate Exam Without Your Real Estate Book and with only 15 to 20 hours of study time. Get registered now at myrealestatetutor.com/exam.